Hello. The Divine Code reading for July 12th, pages 69 and 70. We're in the chapter on the prohibition against making a new religion or adding a commandment. Halakha number 6. Likewise, yesterday we were discussing the manner that a non-Jew could take on the circumcision. So likewise, if a Gentile wants to do one of the other commandments from the Torah in order to receive a practical benefit, but not as a direct commandment, we do not prevent him from doing so, even according to the correct laws. Now, this is what's being said here is directly out of the Rambam's Laws of Kings and Their Wars, where it's describing this. And what's being presented here is practical benefit, which is in italics in the Divine Code. In the Rambam, it just simply says for a benefit in a manner that could mean a spiritual benefit. But it's understood in the Divine Code to refer to a practical benefit. That means that there's something that is the non-Jew is receiving something by doing this commandment, and it's not specified what kind of benefit is being received, but it's being explained that it has to be something that is of practical value for the non-Jew. This applies even if he intends to do the commandment according to all the details of its Jewish law, and certainly he is allowed, if he desires to do it, but not strictly in accordance with its Jewish laws. If he keeps it strictly according to its correct details, one might presume that he should be prevented from doing so, in order that he should not be acting comparatively to a Jew. But if he does a Jewish commandment not strictly in accordance with the prescribed details of Jewish observance, but rather only for a practical benefit he will derive, it is surely not a problem, as long as he does not intend to add this as a commandment or a religious practice for himself. To explain this, we note that his reward in this correct context refers to practical benefit he receives from doing even just a part or an aspect of the commandment, if doing so brings specific benefit for the person or a society in a certain way. So the Divine Code appears at this point to be specifically referring to a practical benefit as being something in this world, not a spiritual reward. What the terminology in the Rambam could be understood as a spiritual reward, but they're saying that it has to be a practical benefit, a physical reward that's received by the person or society. And therefore, in order to receive a practical reward, the person could just do some of the commandment, but not all the commandment, because he's receiving practical benefit from all of the commandment. Now, I'm not sure, when I'm reading this, I'm not sure if the question being asked is a real question or if it's a rhetorical question. The question that's being asked is if the person the non-Jew does a commandment according to all of the details of the commandment. And if he were doing that, he might be seen as somebody that's doing it for the sake of as a Torah commandment. Then a person might think that that's a problem. Now, the Rambam apparently doesn't see it as a problem. At least on a surface reading of the Rambam, it doesn't appear to be a problem. Apparently, the Rambam, at least the way he says it, is that it would be they could allow it. They could even help the person. A Jew could even help the non-Jew doing a commandment, even in all its details, for the sake of the benefit, however we're defining benefit. It seems, and I'm not positive on this, but it seems the divine code is actually taking that as a real concern, rather than a rhetorical question. And that there's a real concern that a person does not take on a mitzvah, a commandment, as a commandment, and therefore he should do a little bit less, sort of like a person that's converting to Judaism on Shabbos. He has to do something, flip on a light switch, just to show that he's not at that point doing Shabbos as a commandment. Apparently they're saying that the non-Jew in this case should do something less, so it doesn't seem as if he's doing it as a commandment. And that's a reasonable concern, because a lot of people, they come in with a lot of enthusiasm and they wind up wanting to do things as they're in the full detail. So it's a reasonable concern that the divine code is creating a rabbinic sense in this regard. It's not something that exists in the Rambam, but the divine code is going a little extra step in that regard. A Gentile may validly choose partial observance of this type. For example, to circumcise only his thick foreskin, as opposed to the Jewish ritual circumcision, which also includes removal of the underlying thin foreskin. Or to marry a woman only to refine himself without committing himself to having children, or to engage in marital relations as a regular obligation. Now, I'm not sure about either one of these examples. The first one shows concerning circumcision. Normally, it's argued that the Gentile may do the more coarse, thicker part of the circumcision without the second part, and that's how it's normally explained. Now it's being shown as it might be possible, and perhaps he should only do part of it. If circumcision is being done, and this chapter spends a lot of time on the subject of circumcision. If circumcision can be done as a gift to God, it would make sense to do it correctly. So I'm not really sure how the divine code is giving this as if it's being done as a gift to God, which we learned yesterday's reading that it could be, then it probably should be done in a correct way. If it's being done for medical reasons, then I could understand it being done in a less way, if it's being done purely for the practical benefit. Likewise, in marriage, I don't know how many people getting married would agree that, well, we're going to get married to refine ourselves, but we're not going to have children because we don't want to be confused as being Jews. or we're not going to have marital relations on a regular basis because we don't want people to think we're Jews. I mean, I don't quite understand these two examples in this. But these are the examples that are being used to explain why how not to take on a Jewish mitzvah as a commandment, but to do it for practical reasons. I would suggest other possible examples. We have the Jewish law of shooing away the mother bird before taking her youngins, or the eggs, or the chicks. The Jews have a mitzvah to shoo away the mother bird. Now, curiously, this is used as an example. I think the Divine Code even mentions it at some point, of a law that a non-Jew could take on. A non-Jew could take on the law of shooing away the mother bird. You see the rabbi here with a stick shooing away the mother bird, and then he goes up to the takes the eggs out of the nest. And we could argue that the Gentile can shoo away the mother bird, but maybe not do the entire mitzvah. Maybe just touch the eggs, and I don't know. Some way, maybe it could be argued that this would be something that could be done on a slightly reduced level, so people don't think that the non-Jew is taking on the Jewish mitzvah. Another one would be the commandment to not eat bugs. Now, strangely enough, a lot of our food, a lot of our vegetables and fruit have bugs in it, and meat. A lot of our food has bugs in it, and we generally, Gentiles, if you see the bug, you kind of get rid of it normally. Maybe check a little bit, wash your lettuce, but normally Gentiles don't go to the extreme that the Jew goes to check all their food for bugs. And we could say that a Gentile might take on this, and there's even in the beginning of this book, there's an exclamation that the nations should do this. The nations are harmed because they don't do it. So it does apply to the nations. It can apply, but perhaps we would check our food, but not to the rigorous level that the Jews check their food. Maybe we wouldn't tear apart our broccoli in the same way. We would just simply look at the broccoli on the outside and see that, I don't see any bugs on the outside of the broccoli, so I figure we're okay. Whereas a Jew would basically break his broccoli into tiny pieces and check every nook and cranny for bugs, because actually they do find the bugs there. And make sure you cook your broccoli well before you eat it. So there are things we could do that non-Jews could take on and not do it completely. I'm not sure about the examples being given here. Other examples: to return some lost objects, but not every type of lost object, not to every person. Now, the Jewish mitzvah of returning lost objects, they wind up having a box in their closet full of odds and ends that they're not allowed to ever get rid of, because they have to return the lost object. You got one sock. You have a guest over. You're not sure who left the sock behind, and no one's coming forward. So you have to take the sock and put it in the box. Or you find things laying on the street. I mean, the Jewish mitzvah obligates the Jew to hold on to an object indefinitely. It could be that the non-Jew will say, well, there's some logical, if I'm going to follow it through the logic, I'll hold on to some. I wouldn't necessarily hold on to a half a sock or one sock or every object I find outside. I'll hold on to things for if they have a reasonable expectation that a person might want it back, and I'll hold on to it for a certain period of time, but not indefinitely. Another example is to take upon himself the obligation to pray to God, but not on a daily, regular basis, while the Jews, on the other hand, are obligated on a daily basis. So the non-Jew could say he's gonna pray to God. He can even say he's gonna pray to God regularly, but not to require himself. You know, the Jew prays five times a day, every day, more often on the holidays and Shabbos. And the non-Jew could say that he's going to pray, but he's not going to obligate himself to pray on a regular time scale, or he's going to do something on a regular time scale, but he's not doing it as an obligation. To honor an old person or a sage, but only if he recognizes the person's wisdom or achievements. I've walked into yeshivas, and all of a sudden I've got these teenagers standing up to offer me their seat, which, I mean, who am I? This teenager doesn't know me. The reason he's standing up is because he's doing it to honor me, even though he doesn't have a clue who I am, but just simply, you know, I'm an elder in his eyes, offering me a seat. And while that's a positive thing, and non-Jews should attempt to do similar things, but we shouldn't, you know, we don't have to do it to that degree. It helps society, it helps the self to become more of a refined person, to offer a seat to an older person. And if we're on the bus, we should do that, but not to the same extent, or not according to, you know, the Jew does it as an obligation. For a non-Jew, the idea would be to do it as more of a logical manner. For example, if he desires to tithe for charity from his produce, his money or produce, this is permitted, with the following exceptions. I'm sure we'll come across the exceptions. However, if a Gentile observes any of the Jewish commandments from the Torah as a religious obligation, even if he does so from a desire to receive a spiritual reward, this is forbidden based on the prohibition of adding a commandment, and there is no spiritual reward to be derived from this. And from one of the classes we had with the Noahide Institute, it was explained that circumcision does have a spiritual reward, but that's an exception due to the children of Keturah, and because of that, there is this concept of a spiritual reward for circumcision. However, there would not be spiritual reward for any of the other mitzvahs. So a non-Jew could do the mitzvah for the practical. Here it explains itself more fully that it's for the practical value in a physical sense, in this world sense, and that there would be no value beyond that in the spiritual realm for doing the mitzvah. And the person has to be very clear that he's doing it for the purpose of benefit in the physical realm and not in the spiritual realm. There's a footnote here. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, Igrit Moshe Yeridea, Volume 2, Chapter 7. It's a long footnote in the Hebrew. Here it just simply refers to it. Moshe Feinstein argues that because the Rambam makes a statement, if he's doing it, he's allowed to do it if he even for the purpose of the he's allowed to do it for the if he thinks he's doing it going to receive benefit. And the terminology used in the Rambam typically refers to a spiritual benefit. That he's going to receive some sort of heavenly reward for his action. If he thinks he's doing it for that reason, we don't stop him. Now, the terminology, the way it's explained, Rabbi Feinstein understands the sentence structure to mean, well, if the non-Jew could receive a benefit, a spiritual benefit, for doing the mitzvah, it would not be necessary for the Rambam to say, even if he thinks he's doing it for the spiritual benefit. Therefore, the fact that the Rambam says that he thinks he's doing it for the spiritual benefit implies that it's a mistake. Because if there was a spiritual benefit, there'd be no reason to question the non-Jew doing it. That's the way that the Rabbi Feinstein understands this. And it would seem that that's also the way the Divine Code is understanding it, is that if there's a spiritual benefit, the Rambam wouldn't have to explain it. Therefore, there's no spiritual benefit to the non-Jew performing a mitzvah. If the non-Jew decides that he's going to check his broccoli for bugs, he's going to tear the broccoli apart, he's going to check all the food for bugs, to the extent of the Jewish commandment, he can receive a physical reward, but there's no spiritual reward to be gained from following that commandment. That seems to be the way that Divine Code understands this, and that's definitely the way that Rabbi Feinstein understands it. Halakha number 7. A Gentile may not perform commandments that require the holiness of a Jew, such as writing a Torah scroll or the scrolls of Phylacteries, tefillin, or a mezuzah. Gentiles are also forbidden to put on Phylacteries at all, and they may not affix a mezuzah scroll on their door. This is a category of mitzvahs that are understood to be fully on a spiritual level. They're hukum. That means that they connect directly into Hashem without having any rational reason that could be understood in this world. That there would not be any logic. I can find logical reason to check my food for bugs. I can even find logical reason for chasing the mother bird away. People can argue back and forth on that one. I can find logical reasons for lots of the commandments in the Torah that I could take on as voluntarily for the sake of the logical reason. There are certain commandments that are understood not to have logical reasons. They're purely what's in the category of hukum, and they connect directly to God. And the Jew does it, but non-Jews would not have any reason to do these commandments. The general rule is that a Jewish commandment between man and his fellow man, or between man and God, which is a reason and a logical benefit for a person or society, is permitted for Gentiles to perform. But this does not apply for any commandment that does not have a logical, natural benefit, but is rather a sign for the Jews, such as ritual fringes, tzitzits, mezuzah scrolls, or phylacteries. See Rambam, The Laws of Tzitzit, 3:9, and Shulchan Aruch, Orchaim, chapter 20, that it is forbidden for a Jew to give or sell a Gentile tzitzit, so the ritual garment will not come to be used by a Gentile for the purpose of disguising himself as a Jew. In this example, the Jewish merchant, the Jew is not allowed, is forbidden from selling or giving the tzitzit. That's the strings that are attached to a four-cornered garment. Oftentimes Jews have them hanging out because the commandment is to be able to see them. The Jews have them hanging out from their from the bottoms of their shirts. The halakha is given. We're given the reason for the halakha is that you might have a unscrupulous non-Jew who disguises himself, makes it look like he's a Jew, so he can join a caravan. He can join a group of Jews and rob them. Now, this is obviously the concern of barbarians, the Akum, who are not allowed to, the Jew is not allowed to get a haircut. He's not allowed to see him as a doctor, because the concern is that these are barbarians who are going to destroy a person the moment they get a chance. They're the Vikings. They're Attila the Hun. They're vicious people that you can't trust at all. I'm not exactly sure if this applies to the non-Jew. I'm not saying that the Noahide, the person today, pious among the nations of the world, which the divine code is written for, would fall in this category. I'm not saying that the pious among the nations of the world are allowed to wear tzitzits. I'm just saying that this exclamation does not fit the audience of the book. So we have to go deeper into this to understand the reasoning. Likewise, regarding a mezuzah scroll, Rima writes in Yoredea, chapter 291, in the name of Maharal, that a Jew should not give a mezuzah scroll to a Gentile for the same reason. Although a righteous Gentile who observes the Noahide code would not be suspected of that deception, nevertheless, it appears that beyond this, there is a general reason why Gentiles should not be compared completely to Jews. Therefore, they should not perform uniquely commanded Jewish signs, such as wearing tzitzit-type fringes on a four-cornered garment, or having a mezuzah scroll on their doorpost. So there can be a logical reason. If a pious among the nations is seen, let's say, walking into McDonald's, and a Jew sees that, especially in today's society where a lot of Jews don't understand the commandments, there might be a secular Jew who sees that, and in his mind he determines that there's an Orthodox, because it's the Orthodox who wear tzitzits. He might think there's an Orthodox logic to going to McDonald's, and therefore it would be okay for him to go to McDonald's. So there is logical reasons why the non-Jew should not wear tzitzits. whether this would apply to a non-Jew. Would a non-Jew be allowed to wear tzitzits if he keeps it inside of his pants? Because it's kind of a hassle. You know, the Jew has to take the string and kind of string it out between, you know, his shirt is tucked in, and he has to get the string. There's a way, you know, I guess they do it their whole life, so it's easy for them. But there's a way that they get the string to go out of their pant loop, their waist, so it's visible. But if a non-Jew were to wear tzitzits and have it inside, would that be allowed? And so far, we haven't come to a place where it would be forbidden completely, or if he wore tzitzits when he's in his house, or, you know, if he wears it when he's at show, and he's not going to be going to Burger King, he's at show. And like when I go to show, for the days I go to show, I wear a yarmulke when I walk in the door. I put the yarmulke on, and I walk out the door. I take the yarmulke off. So when I'm at show, I'm wearing a yarmulke. Would I be allowed to have tzitzits at that time? So that question still needs to be addressed. So far, we're being given incidental reasons for not wearing tzitzits. Is there a general reason? C. Cannot Prohibition, Yorkheim, Rule 2, Chapter 28, which explains that Rabbi Yehuda the Prince gave a mezuzah scroll to a Tarvan, a Roman Gentile, only to own it, but not to be affixed to the door. There's a story that the rabbi was friends with this Roman, and during the course of the friendship, he gave the Roman a mezuzah scroll. But we don't have a lot in the story about what happened. What's the background story? You know, what happened here? What was he allowed to do? So apparently he was allowed to have the mezuzah scroll, but he was not allowed to place it on the door. And the commandment is to place it on the door. In fact, the door is what the mezuzah is. The term mezuzah refers to the door frame, the post on the side of the door. It doesn't actually refer to the scroll. We call it, colloquially, we call that the mezuzah, the scroll, or even people call the box. The scroll goes inside. They call that the mezuzah, but it's not really a mezuzah until it's affixed to the door. It is obvious that Gentiles should not put on phylacteries because one needs to have the holiness of a Jew to do so. Now, this is the term, the holiness of the Jew, which on the surface doesn't. It sounds kind of condescending. Well, you got to be holy to wear these things. Yeah, it's the way it's termed causes a lot of difficulty with the non-Jews. Now, there's an aspect to the Jewish commandments. There's different aspects to Jewish commandments. There's the aspect of the logical reasoning of the Jewish commandment. Jewish commandments, that the mishpatin of the Jewish commandment, and that we're being told is okay for the non-Jew to do things for that reason. Then there's the signs of the Jewish commandments. You know, that you're to do this as a sign or remembrance, such as a lot of the laws of Passover. It's being done for a logical reason, but it's being done for the sake of remembering things that may or may not have application to the non-Jew. Very, very often they don't. And then there's the other aspect of a Torah commandment, the Jewish Torah commandments, that are the hukum of the commandment. Now, all the commandments have a hukum quality to it. Ultimately, the Jew does the commandment because it's commanded in God by the Torah. Even the most logical commandments are done by the Jew because they're given in the Torah. You know, do not steal is a commandment. The Jew does not steal, not because it's logical, even though it is very logical not to steal. The Jew does not steal because it's a commandment in the Torah. Now we can see there's also logical reasons. Therefore, a non-Jew, well, that's a no-hide law. But let's say checking your food for bugs. The Jew checks his foods for bugs because it's a commandment from God, not to eat bugs. The non-Jew logically does not want to eat bugs. Most non-Jews would not want to eat bugs if it was obvious to them that there's a bug crawling across their food. And therefore, the non-Jew can take on aspects of this commandment to look through and make sure he doesn't have bugs in his food. He checks his food a little bit more closely, and he knows it's a Torah commandment. He's doing it for the logical reason. There's some commandments in the Torah that the logical reasons really don't. A person would not come to do this for the logical reason. Those are what's referred to as the hukum of the Torah. When they categorize the Torah laws, that would be what they call a hok. And interestingly, there's books written on the logical reasons for these, the benefits to these things. So it's, a person can say a mezuzah scroll, for example. We could say nobody would ever come to the idea on his own to write these verses on parchment and put them on a doorpost. People would not logically come to that idea, and it wouldn't make sense even if it was suggested to someone and say, "What are you talking about? Why would I do that?" But their books have been written about the logical reasons for putting a mezuzah on writing a mezuzah and affixing it to a door. And there's even part of the logical reason is that there's a protection that's given to the house. A protection is a spiritual protection is placed over the house because they have mezuzahs on their doors. And there's a big campaign for people to check their mezuzah scrolls to make sure they're written correctly and nothing is cracked or anything, for the sake of protecting people's houses. When we look more closely at this thing, because what happens is people, when they heard that we're doing it for the sake of protecting the house, people started mistakenly viewing a mezuzah scroll as like a talisman, a good luck charm. And if that is understood as a logical reason to place a mezuzah on a door, to write a mezuzah and place it on the door, then that could apply to non-Jews as well. I mean, what's wrong? If it protects the house, I have smoke alarms in my house. If it protects my house, why wouldn't I want to do it? So it's explained. There's an insight in the Art Scrolls Book of Mitzvahs where it discusses this topic under the commandment of mezuzahs, the difficulty of people treating it as a talisman. And the way it's explained is that the reason why it protects the house is because it's a commandment. It's a commandment, and therefore it protects the house. It's not that you're doing it because it protects the house, therefore we do it. It protects the house because it's a commandment. Well, for a non-Jew, affixing a Torah scroll on a door is not a commandment. Therefore, if the benefit is because it is given as a commandment, then that benefit is not going to reach the non-Jew for whom it's not a commandment. And we have to understand this. This is where the stuff gets complex, and you start learning the laws of Noahide. You're going to wind up with lots of books on your shelves, bookcases, trying to figure this stuff out. If the benefit is because it's a commandment and it's not a commandment to the non-Jew, then it's not a benefit to do it. And therefore, the protection given by a mezuzah scroll being affixed to a door the protection to the house does not work for the non-Jew, and therefore it would not be a rational reason for the non-Jew to affix a Torah scroll. And so any commandment that the benefit beyond the mezuzah, but other commandments such as phylacteries and tzitzits and that, where the benefit is because of the because it's a commandment. The benefit derives from the fact that it's a commandment and not because of any logical reason that would exist outside of it. Then those areas are considered to be forbidden for the non-Jew. There's no reason for the non-Jew to do it. And that seems to be the rationale that's being used here. If it is a godly statute for the Jews without reason or benefit, understood to the person, a Gentile should not have performed, should be prevented from performing such commandments, and should be taught that it is improper for him to observe them. Therefore, what's being said here is that in a case of in the case of these more holy mitzvahs, such as mezuzahs, phylacteries, and such, which is different from what was explained in the Rambam, where he's doing it for the sake of the reward. Because there's no reward in these cases, then in the other cases where there's a reward, the Jew should not prevent the non-Jew from doing it, and may even help the non-Jew. In the case where there's no practical benefit, then the Jew should, and the Noahide also, should prevent a non-Jew from doing these commandments. Thank you.